Hi, everyone. This is Tom Bronson, and welcome to the Maximize Business Value webinar series, a series of educational webinars for business owners who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. So this is volume 3 in this series. We did our first webinar in August talking with Susan Bryant. She's principal at MB Group, a CPA firm in North Texas, about things that you can do to improve finances in your business to improve business value. Susan's an amazing CPA. You need to get to know her. If you don't know her already, you can find a copy of that on our YouTube channel, which is Maximize Business Value. Then last month, we visited with my great friend, John Gorbett, principal at the Gorbett Group, but also the operations and finance master here at Mastery Partners. You can find his webinar also out there on our YouTube channel, the Maximize Business Value YouTube channel. But today I am thrilled to be joined by my great friend, Mark Mitford. He's principal at HR Catalyst and also the HR master here at Mastery Partners. I've known Mark for about 20 years, I think, and have even used his services as a fractional executive director of HR at some of my businesses. Mark has really a very keen strategic mind for all things HR. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of his wisdom with you today. So welcome, Mark. Before we jump in, so thrilled to have you with us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Tom. Thanks. Yeah, thanks again for the invitation. And I think it has been about 20 years that we've known each other, believe it or not. So a little bit about myself personally. Blessed to be married for the same lovely lady for about 28 years now. Got two kids that both recently graduated from Baylor University, reside over in Grapevine, and been here for about 20 years also. That's again how we connected. That's how we connected originally many years ago. But that's a little bit about myself, and I'm happy to jump in and tell you a little bit about what HR Catalyst does whenever
Oh,
you'd like to.
please.
Okay.
I want to hear a little bit about your background because it's an amazing story of kind of the progression and then why you decided to start HR Catalyst.
Sure. No, I'd be happy to. So HR Catalyst. So a little bit about myself. Again, I started the company in, hard to believe, but 7 years ago. So this time actually this month, 7 years ago. So it's been a great transition for me to go out on my own. But the backdrop is actually most of my, sometimes I jokingly say I'm kind of like a poster child of the Dallas economy. So I worked all the way through. I started off big companies. So I started off Ericsson, Nortel, Texas Instruments, PepsiCo are a couple of notable favorites, I guess. So I had a lot of telecom background, a lot of high tech. Even my stint at Pepsi, actually, I was embedded in the IT organization for Pepsi. So I actually sat and I worked for the global CTO for PepsiCo. My background in HR, I was very fortunate that I actually started off on the very strategic side of HR. So strategy in HR is leadership development, change management, succession planning, project team development. So that's where I cut my teeth, and I actually backed into your traditional things that you think about from an HR person's perspective, where you're actually supporting a line of business. And then after I did a stint for roughly 18 years in the larger corporate world, Pepsi was all the way up. Pepsi's a Fortune 50 company. I actually dropped down in size, worked for 3 companies where I headed up HR. 2 of those were private equity backed by a couple of the global leaders in private equity, Warburg and the Carlyle, and worked for them as their top HR executive. And then I also worked for Nest Corporation as a top HR executive. That actually started to get that was actually the shape and trajectory of my career. It actually got me to enjoy kind of working in smaller company environments. Because, as all of you who've worked in the big behemoth companies, if you want to get something big done, you have to do it by committee. You have to have massive projects. And a lot of times a major change is going to take you 6 to 12 months to try to implement. Whereas in a much smaller company, in your kind of like your smaller, your lower middle market tier, you can get things done a heck of a lot quicker. And so that's where I really decided that was kind of the genesis of moving me into founding my own company. because there are so many companies, those three middle market size companies, and one of them was about a $500 million company with 1,500 employees in 10 countries. I was the first strategic HR person they had on that actually was within their team. And before that, everything else was just traditional, I guess, old school and clunky HR. It's payroll, it's benefits. You hire some people, you fire some people, and that's what HR did. Very transactional. So I was able to build up a little more of a strategic agenda from an HR perspective, and that got me to do what I specialize in today with HR Catalyst.
So that implies that HR is no longer clunky.
Yeah. It's let's see, there are still, I hate to say, but there are still a lot of companies, even very large companies, that all they do are two facets of HR. They handle the basic day-to-day functions of HR, payroll, getting people paid, administer benefits. You hire some people, you fire some people. There may be a little bit of rationale, but maybe not. And then the other big component is compliance. You make sure you do everything in a very compliant way, which you have to, because a lot of companies don't. But I would say there's much more when you look at it, and this is something, Tom, I know we've talked about this extensively. Your largest single investment within any organization, any company whatsoever, is your people.
Yeah.
Your people costs will be anywhere between 50 to 75% of your overall cost structure, depending if you're a manufacturing company or a professional services company. If you're professional services, it's going to be much higher. But in a company that has heavy equipment, I work with a lot of construction companies now and a lot of trucks and a big fleet there, your costs are going to be a little bit less, but your single line item that's going to be the biggest is your people. So why not figure out how to optimize your people, because that will then increase your revenue and drop down to the bottom line of profit.
I am so glad that you chose the word investment rather than expense, because as you know, I'm a huge fan of, we don't spend money on anything, we only invest money. And so we look for a return on investment, and investing in your people really should be viewed that way, that you are investing in people, that yes, you contract with them to come and do work, and in exchange you pay them for that work, but that is an investment in the long-term future of your company. Before we move on to the additional slides here, I did want to tell sort of the side story. For many years, Mark and I have been, very close and talk to one another on a regular basis. We've been in a small group together. And when he was going through that, left PepsiCo and went through the smaller companies, I kept telling him, geez, Mark, the stuff that you do is stuff that smaller companies could really benefit from, but we can't afford you, and you and I talked many, many times about, why don't you just break out and hang a shingle and come to work for smaller companies like me on a fractional basis. And one day Mark showed up in my office, I guess it was 7 years ago this month, and laid down his brochure, told me what he's doing, and said, okay, Bronson, you need to put your money where your mouth is and hire me to do this. And I did, and I never regretted it. I'm sure we'll tell some stories about that today. I always claimed that I was your first customer, but I know that you had somebody else ahead of me, but we'll expunge the record on that. Yeah. So why is this stuff important? Why is HR important? I want to back up and just give a few slides that we do on a regular basis here on the Maximize Business Value webinar series. 72% of business owners have no exit strategy at all. 72%. Now, if you look at business in the United States as a whole, there are a little over 6 million businesses that employ people. There's another 22 million businesses that are single entrepreneurs or online businesses or things like that with no payroll other than the individual that owns it. But there's a little over 6 million businesses in the United States that employ people. In the small business category, or lower middle market and down category, which is about $100 million in revenue and below, that comprises 99.7% of all of businesses that employ people. And when we talk about 72% of business owners that have no exit strategy, that's the category I'm talking about. So this is most businesses in America that don't. 48% of business owners who want to sell their business right now have no exit strategy. And here's the alarming thing: if you haven't planned for it and you need to sell your business now or want to sell your business now, there is an alarming stat that is very frustrating to us here at Mastery Partners, and that is that of the businesses that come on the market each year, in that small business category, under $100 million in revenue and below, 83% of those businesses that want or need to sell fail to reach a transaction. 83%. That means that only 17% of the businesses that want to transition actually successfully do so. Now, in that 83%, some may go on and pull back and come out and pull back and come out again. But many of them wind up closing or some other, or liquidating, that kind of thing. And so that is just an alarming stat, and we're here to fix that. And in one of the key areas that you can do that is in, of course, HR. Do you know the value of your business today? Have you gone through a process to really understand the value of your business? Not the gosh, I hope to get one day, or my buddy just sold his business for 10 million and I'm at least as good as he is, so mine should be worth $10 million. I'm talking about really understanding the value of your business. That is probably one of the leading causes that businesses don't transact, is owner expectations of enterprise value are just way out of whack with what is actually out there on the market. If you do know the value of your business, is this the way it makes you feel? Like, I could sell this tomorrow and be on a beach, in Barbados having a cocktail? Or is this how it makes you feel? And for most business owners, when they have the reality of what my business is really worth today, this is kind of where they land, or somewhere perhaps in between. So today we're going to talk about all things HR and improving the value of your business. And so in the chat box, there is a PDF that you can download that you can take notes on, because I encourage you to take notes as we go, or get a legal pad and start writing some notes, because at the end, I'm going to challenge you to pick 2 or 3 things that are the most important things that you learned today that you want to implement in your business tomorrow. And why do I do that? Every time I do a lot of public speaking, I do a lot of seminars, and now I do a lot of webinars, and you come to these things and you learn things about improving your business, but then you move on to the next thing, right? We're caught up in the day-to-day. I really want you to be intentional with our webinars of picking 2 or 3 things that you can go out there and implement in your business today. And we've got this webinar is chock full of things that you can do. So think about that. Also, if you have a question, please put it in the chat. When we get kind of toward the end here, Kim is going to tell me those questions. Now, many times folks are giving me a private chat, which is great, but just know I won't see it until the webinar is over. So if you have a question that you want me to address at the end, or Mark and I to address at the end, please put it in the public chat, and Kim will bring those up to us at the end. Today, I call this webinar "Human Capital Drives Business Value," and so let's jump in, shall we? We're going to talk about all things human resources today. By the way, this presentation is pulled from a bigger half-day workshop, and so we're starting with number 11. That's intentional. This came from our other presentation, and we pulled the slides that were important to talk about today related to HR. So don't think that we misnumbered these. These are pulled from a bigger presentation. So the first thing I want to talk about here is culture. Little things mean everything. And I think every business owner should really intentionally think about and examine their culture. When we do our assessment, which is the first way that we engage with our clients, one of the questions that we ask is, on a scale of 1 to 6, how would you rate your corporate culture? And they'll give me an answer, 6 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. By the way, we use a 6-point scale because there's no way you could be average in a 6-point scale. You're either above average with a 4 or below average with a 3. And so when we ask and they give us an answer, then I'll turn it and say, so if I went out right now and ask your people how they would rate your culture, what would they say? And almost always the number comes in lower. And so my argument would be, then that really is the culture of the organization. So Mark, what is corporate culture and why is it so important to work and develop it?
Sure. Great question, Tom. It's, and again, I'll just give you the short version because we could spend an hour talking about corporate culture. So, to me, it's the written and it's the unwritten rules and dialogue that actually gets things done within the organization. So it's really what's formalized within the organization and also not just formalized, but it's also the way you actually, and then it's the informal things, how you get things done. It's almost like in a lot of companies, the classic line is you had the meeting before the meeting. You had the meeting before the meeting to get everything kind of all the seeds planted with the key stakeholders and decision makers before you actually went to the meeting. And that's where you actually finalize details versus things like that. So, on that's kind of the very short, that's kind of like the 25-cent definition of it. But when you look at it, to me, it's also really when you look at the formalized, you look at the formalized nature of your culture, it's really going back and having a strong and compelling vision, mission or purpose statement, and set of core values. And when HR Catalyst does we do an HR assessment actually with a lot of our newer clients. We're getting ready to do one in San Antonio actually in a few weeks, and just did one for a company that's local about 15 minutes away from my house in Euless. And it's interesting because we ask the same question. We ask them, define your corporate culture. And we actually ask them to do it in narrative. So I said, put down a couple of words or phrases that describe your corporate culture. And it is just like you found, Tom, when you do that at Mastery Partners. It's fascinating because I will, if we talk to 10 people, sometimes I will tell you that these people all work for totally different companies because there's nothing in common when I ask them through words or phrases how they define their corporate culture. And then I know that's something that's definitely not intentional or leadership led. It's something that's very haphazard, and a lot of companies have core values, but then I ask them too, another question I'll follow up with. So tell me, it's okay if you have core values. Yeah, we got core values. Well, tell me what they are. And then they'll struggle. It's almost like you ask them to, tell me about the theory of relativity. It's like, well, I think one of them is, maybe it's around teamwork. I'm not sure though. And just so on and so forth. And then we know this is something that's not intentional, that is not something like a beat of a drum. I know you're a very good percussionist, Tom. So it's not that constant drum beat. It's something that's very haphazard. And then the CEO, it's kind of like, CEO by magazine and managing by magazine. They read something on the airplane on a magazine, said, you got to have core values. So guess what? They decided to create some core values. But there's nothing they do about them to actually reinforce them and hire against their core values, promote against their core values, and fire against their core values. And if you're not doing them, then you're just paying lip service to them. And then your culture is going to be something that's going to be a little bit confused and very muddy.
Well, and a lot of companies claim to have core values, and that's it. But the question is, are your core values platitudes that are hanging in a poster on the wall? And the only way you can remember your core values is to go and look at that poster. Chances are you might need to re-examine your core values, right? And they should be lofty platitudes, right? But they should be something that is used and lived and breathed in the company. And every person that you ask in the company should be able to, hey, what are your core values? Boom, 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 boom. And they can rattle them right off because we're living them. We're using them in our daily business. catch somebody doing enacting the core values, and that has to be intentional. That's not an event where you come out and do that. A lot of people think corporate culture is an event. What do you think about that, Mark?
Yeah, no, exactly, Tom. It's not an event. It's something that actually, for companies that have strong core values, this is just the way they do business. If they actually have core values that are really embedded in their culture, this is just the way. If you went to one of their meetings and you sat there as if you were the fly on the wall, you would hear words and you would hear things when they're trying to make a tough decision. You would see the DNA of the company coming out in their core values, the statements they say within I think about March. You think about how many companies had to start pivoting very, very quickly in March and April as the whole world somewhat turned upside down. And you know what? And that's the key thing. I think the key, the key idea and degree of success of core values is you don't just use them in the good times, and you don't just refer back to your mission in the good times. You also go back to that in the bad times, because that's what's really going, and you continue to drive that with your employees during the tough times. And that's it. It's almost like a lot of companies, they were successful over the last 10 years, 8 to 10 years, simply because the economic environment was so good. But when the economic environment turns in a pandemic we had no idea was coming, that's when companies with a really strong culture, really strong mission and set of core values, that's when those companies will continue to thrive in those times. Even though they may dip financially, they will continue to thrive in those times, and they'll be able to come out of the back end of this even stronger than they were before.
Yeah, we could talk on about corporate culture and values and things. We did a podcast several months ago, actually, probably about 6 months ago, that we did talk a lot about corporate culture. If our viewers today are interested in learning more about corporate culture and how to be able to build a strong culture and use the core values, then I would invite you to go back to that podcast. It's the Maximize Business Value podcast, and look for I think it was episode 1 or 2 that we did. But let's move on here. I really think that the CEO in every company should consider himself the leader of the culture, and they should be the chief culture officer, so CCO. And if you struggle with your corporate culture, then I know that Mark has some tools to be able to help with that. That's so very important. So going backwards, we had number 11. Now we've got number 9, and in a minute we'll have number 10. Under investing in your HR leaders. So in small companies, a lot of times they start up, you start hiring people, you grow and you hire somebody to do the books. And then that person doing the books is also now doing the payroll. And then as the company continues to grow, then that person typically gets elevated into some level of HR, or you hire somebody else to do the payroll and they become the HR director. And then perhaps they may or may not have the skills necessary to be a solid HR director. So I say, don't underinvest in your HR leader. Tell us more about that, Mark.
Sure. It's, and I think that's, you hit the nail on the head, Tom. That's a classic example. You have somebody who, and I don't know, I'll just, a typical example is which is just, it's always fascinating to me because again, CFOs and the finance organization that's worth its weight in gold in every organization, of course. But a lot of times in smaller companies, the CFO also runs HR. And the really interesting there is when you look at the core skill sets of an HR person and a CFO, there's really not a lot of correlation between the two. So it's always just fascinating to me because a lot of it starts out with payroll. It kind of goes back to payroll benefits. So it goes back to the number side and the investment side of people. And so it naturally falls under that group. But I would say if for organizations that are growing or they're going through some sort of major transformational change, those type of organizations, they really need to invest in something more than a clerical person who's managing the HR function. What I would say, we try to do with an HR Catalyst, for instance, is every company, if they don't, again, they need to be talking to somebody like you. Is if companies don't have a really well-honed business strategy, if a company's currently 5 million in revenue and they want, of course, I'm going to say, well, every CEO wants the company to grow. So they're trying to go from 5 million to $10 million over the next 3 years. What we try to do then is create a people strategy that aligns with their business strategy. Because when you look at a people strategy, if you're going to go from 5 million to 10 million, there's a lot of people stuff that needs to happen behind that. You're probably going to have to hire a lot of people. You're probably going to have to promote a number of people. So I think back to your question, I think having somebody who is able to think strategically from an HR perspective versus very tactically and very compliance focused, having somebody who has a seat at the table, who is a little more of a strategic HR person, is an investment. It's not a cost. It's really going to be an investment, because it goes back to what we discussed earlier, that your people cost you anywhere between 50 to 75% of your overall cost structure is baked on people. And you need to be able to figure out how to get the most out of them each and every day within the company to be successful.
I totally agree. My example of that is at one of my businesses. We were the classic story. We started with, when I bought the company, it had 13 employees, and before I knew it, it had over 200 employees. And the HR director, while a wonderful, wonderful person, didn't have kind of that executive and strategic level of thinking. And that's why we brought in HR Catalyst to not only help us internally think through things, all things HR strategically, but also to help and provide our HR director at the time with the kind of training and insight and really building her career up. I'm so thrilled that she's running an HR group now for a much bigger company because she went through and got the training that she needed to do that. So don't underinvest in the HR leader. Make sure that you've got somebody that can be strategic. Let's switch gears. Yes.
We have a good question. At what point does it make sense to bring HR in-house as opposed to using external fractional providers? Like, is it revenue, headcount, or some combination, do you think?
Wow. Mark, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a great question. Whoever asked that, thanks for bringing that up. It's kind of interesting because I would say bringing it in-house is, I would say, any company that's this new client that I'm working with, actually, ironically, just hired this week their first internal HR person, and they're at about 60 employees. So they're at about 60 employees. They're bringing on a junior level HR person who's got about 5 years of HR experience, but working on getting a certification in HR. And I'm actually going to be working with them as kind of their outside HR, they're fractional VP of HR. So, but I would say to that point, Kim, because I would say in a lot of cases, a lot of companies, they're very small, use a PEO, a professional employer organization, and there's a lot of great ones out there. But I would just say that at some point that cost becomes very prohibitive for an organization. So at some point you need to look at migrating, but I would say typically anywhere between 50 to 100 employees would be a good time to looking at investing in an HR person. And again, where we try to come in is we typically, our target client, our ideal client, is probably between 25 employees up to organizations that are 300 or 400 that don't have a director or VP on board just yet. So a lot of times that's, again, where we can add the strategic horsepower in an organization that's 50 people or 150 people to provide that people strategy and be able to create that for an organization. But it's a great question. Hopefully that answer helped out there.
And I hate to be political here in the political season, but by the way, everybody, I did vote. So if you're watching this, I voted. So, but the answer is it depends, right, Mark? It really depends on. It depends on the business. I don't think that, as I think through in my businesses, sometimes I didn't have like HR in-house for for until we had hundreds of employees, and other times we brought it in house sooner. And so it really depends on the business and the strategic needs of the business. But again, like Mark said earlier, if your HR strategy aligns with your business strategy, then it will become more apparent when you need to make those moves. Item 10 here is that we suggest that you obtain non-competes and non-solicitation agreements from key employees. What does that mean, Mark?
Yeah, when you look at those, Tom, again, I think we, good or bad, as we live in a litigious world. And I think the non-competes and the non-disclosure agreements, when we were looking at those are really, those are legally sound documents that actually prohibit, when you're looking at non-competes. Let me tackle that one first. If a key employee, director, VP, C-level employee leaves the company, what you do is you actually you somewhat tie them so that they can't actually go to work for one of your direct competitors. So very, very much kind of implied in the name. So you actually prohibit them from working for one of your competitors. A lot of times, again, the rationale for that is they have been involved in creating, and they know the strategy of the company. They know the secret sauce of the company inside and backwards. Everything from sales to marketing strategies to pricing. And if that got into a direct competitor's hand, it wouldn't be a good thing. The other one around non-disclosure, very much the same thing around, if you're looking at that from a non-disclosure perspective, is that there are certain things that you want to tie that even if that person created, and in some companies, I worked in high tech for years, a lot of companies, they created a lot of intellectual property. And so you want to make sure that that intellectual property does not, through a good non-disclosure agreement, that intellectual property is actually property of the company versus that employee. So that cannot leave, that information cannot leave with that employee if they do depart from the company for good terms or bad terms. So I think that kind of gives some of the backdrop as to why those things are needed, because again, a gentleman's agreement, I know, I work for some companies too, and there's a lot of good old boys in Texas, and everything's done by a handshake. But I think, when it comes down to things that are very strategic in this world, and even in a company that's I work for some companies that are third generation family owned, they still are big backers. The third generation, the grandson or granddaughter who's run the company now, I'll guarantee you they want everything in writing or else it doesn't exist. So that's just a good backdrop as to why that's very advisable from an HR and also legal perspective.
And from a key employee perspective, in terms of the value of the business, if one of your key employees, let's say that there's not a lot of intellectual property that they can take off, but also there aren't any barriers to entry in the business, right? Someone could jump out and go and start a business competitively very easily in the business. Having if there's always that threat that your key employees could leave and set up shop and compete against you, that can do serious damage to the value of the business. And in fact, as you get closer to a transition of the business, whether that's an internal or an external transition of the business, you need to make sure that you've got your key people locked down, because a buyer, let's say you're going to go to a third party buyer, comes in and all the key people bolt at the closing. Well, what do you have then? I mean, the business is really, the value of the business is in the people doing the work. And if all the key people walk out on day one, then that can be a real challenge. So from a value perspective, it's important to make sure that you take care of your people, that you have an agreement in place. Then the other component here is the non-solicitation, and that goes to not being able to take your customers away, going to solicit your customers, but also your employees. We've had situations where an employee left, went and found the greener pastures, and then called and recruited all of the other employees in that department. And so making sure that you have those things documented are important. But as we move on, Mark, you just mentioned, by the way, you see our numbering sequence 11, 9, 10, and now 8. Having a handshake agreement is really worthless. right? Why is it you should document and formalize your agreements?
Yeah, again, it just goes back to if something happens to where there is a divorce from a business perspective, you just want to make sure that, especially for key employees, so if you're talking about, especially in the key employee realm, you want to understand what that's going to look like if things do end up going sideways for whatever reason. So that's even so, and even in offer letters. So even in company with, just the basics of your everyday employee, just making sure you have a good offer that mention things about employment at will, that mention things about if they are bonus eligible, at least reference. You don't have to have an offer that's 20 pages long, but you reference documents back, because you want to make sure those things are done very clearly. I've seen it because I work with some companies on sales or commission agreements too. And you want to make sure too, those are very ironclad, especially if that salesperson departs, because that salesperson, I'll guarantee that person thinks they're holding their hand out and they think they're eligible for all this money. And in some cases they are eligible for a payout and some residuals. But again, if you don't have those things written down very clearly and concisely in layman's terms, then things can go sideways very quickly, and you end up in a situation that they can't be resolved amicably. Then they end up going to both sides have to seek an attorney, and when that happens, the only folks that usually end up winning there is sometimes the attorney.
Let me give you two great examples of that. We bought a company one time where we paid a lot of money for it. The check had a lot of zeros in it after the leading number, but the owners of that business had been kind of prompting their employees for years and years, help us get to where we're going, and we're going to take care of you. We're going to take care of you. And one of the things as we're acquiring businesses that we note is, hey, is there a portion of this allocation going to key employees or employees that you want to retain? And the answer we got in this case, yes, but we're going to take care of that. You pay us and we're going to take care of paying the people. Okay, so we said that that's fine. Well, a few days after the transaction, we come to find out this was it was in excess of a $10 million transaction. And I'm visiting and I find out the employees are all disgruntled. And I'm going, what is going on? And several of them kind of pulled me aside, the key leaders that stay behind, and said they gave us an insulting payout. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, they've always told us they were going to take care of us. And I said, well, what did you get? And one of the key people told me the amount that they got. And so I went and found the owners and I said, you said that you were going to take care of your people. Yes, and we did. And I said, well, how much did you allocate out of this, very large payout? $100,000 divvied up among 25 people. So the point is that the owners had in mind what the value was that they were going to pay people. And by not formalizing it, by not documenting it, the employees had a very different number in mind. And therefore it caused then pain and consternation. And another example just this week where a good friend of mine found out that the spouse their business had been sold, and the business owner reached out to the spouse and said, hey, we sold the business. However, I need you to stay on because I've got an earn out and I'm going to take care of you. And when I heard those words, I said, oh, well, how are they going to take care of you? Be sure to get those things documented. Your idea of how to be being taken care of and their idea of being taken care of may be two very, very different things. And so it's so important to document those things. Speaking of documenting, why is it important? We this is a common theme. We say to business owners all the time, you need to document processes everywhere. Mark, can you give us some examples of what processes need to be documented in HR?
Yeah, it's I would start out with the first ones there two that Tom that I come up with. First one is around hiring. The first one is around just having a good set of interview questions for hiring. It's still amazing out there that some companies ask questions that are actually not bad questions around hiring and selection, but they actually ask questions that are illegal. So they actually ask questions that are blatantly illegal. And a lot of it's just, they're very innocent, and they're just kind of come up in a casual conversation because you feel comfortable with the candidate. So having a really good set of interview questions, I think, again, most of the folks on here are, they're well experienced. I say the key thing is to asking behavioral interview questions, asking them questions about, tell me about a situation when. The other good thing too, from going back to core values, is making sure you ask questions that will help to decipher whether that person is going to be a cultural fit within your organization. So if you have a question, if you have a core value that's focused on accountability. So tell me about a situation where you had to hold, if this is a managerial position, where you had to hold a subordinate employee accountable. What did you do exactly? And walk me through what that looked like. The next thing is around, also, I'd say on the flip side, I'll go from one bookend to the other bookend, would be around termination. It's around making sure you have a proper disciplinary action process. Again, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said, well, we live in Texas, it's an employment at will state. I said, yeah, congratulations, it is. But guess what? You can't just fire anybody for any stupid reason. You got to have some rhyme and reason for it. You've got to have some documentation for it, because again, a company that is quite often, a lot of companies that don't have a senior level HR person on staff, or any HR person on staff, they just randomly hire people left, right, and center just for no good reason. And then that can create huge issues for that company. That person goes to the Department of Labor, or they go and bring on an attorney. Then that company has to backfill. So making sure you have good documentation there. The other good thing I would say too, is from a documentation standpoint, is anything around looking at your pay practices, making sure that those are correctly documented, around doing good performance reviews, and also making sure those are well documented too. Lastly, I'll just throw in there for fun, just even having good and updated from a documentation. If your employment handbook hasn't been updated and reviewed in the last 2 years, it's not a bad idea to have it reviewed by somebody, possibly myself, or having it reviewed by an attorney. Again, if there's any attorney friends on here, I'll just tell you point blank, I'll do it for 25% of what an attorney will do it for, because my price point is a lot less. My hourly rate is a lot less than theirs, and I know enough attorneys, and they usually chuckle, and then they make me pick up the tab for lunch. So I'll say, well, I guess that's a fair thing, because I kind of
we have a lot of attorney friends.
Yeah, I do. I have a lot too, but I'm like, hey, here's my price, and let's say, wow, that's not my price. My price is about 4 to 5x of yours. But even having a good handbook, and the last thing I'll say there is job descriptions. Having good job descriptions for all positions, just something as basic as that, because if you don't have a good job description, then you don't even, companies that go out there and try to hire, a lot of companies, they do such a poor job at hiring and doing job postings. They can't even attract the right candidates, because the candidates can't decipher what the job really entails. And so a lot of those basic things, if you don't, and again, working for a PepsiCo size company, there are 300,000 people at PepsiCo, but they still only had probably 25, 30 HR processes. But what they did is they had those all locked down, ticked and tied. They had them in 100 different countries that PepsiCo does business in, but they were all the same per country. They had to do some things that were maybe a little bit different by country for legal reasons, but they're all still very much the same. And that's how you can scale an organization up, is by having good documented processes you use over and over again, especially in the HR function.
We actually had some international operations. Our company was based here in Texas, the last company I sold, but we had some business and some employees based in the country of California. And I mean, that is a whole different ball game. I got to tell you, and Mark led us through this. We had to have a separate HR handbook for California to follow the rules there. That's I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but yes, be careful because laws are different in different places.
They are.
Another giant biggie that I think is so important for all businesses is to identify your KPIs, your metrics, the things that you want to measure on a routine basis, whether daily, weekly, or monthly. What are some things that you should be measuring on a routine basis in HR? Because every department should have metrics. What are the kind of things you can do there, Mark?
Yeah, a couple of them off the top of my head there, Tom, is that one of the key things is you have to look at your overall employee satisfaction. Every company should look at employee satisfaction. And it's amazing over the last, now probably 15 years, employee satisfaction and employee engagement has been running about 33% on employees who are actually actively engaged in the company. And when I say actively engaged, these are employees who actually, when they get out of work, they're looking forward to going to work. And the other big kicker there is they are going to give discretionary effort in their jobs. They're going to be going above and beyond. About 50%, 50 something percent are actually disengaged. And the other point, which is around, if I did my math, rough math is going to say about 15 to 20% are actually actively disengaged. So employee engagement's one. The other thing is going to be around looking at your employee performance. So identifying who your bottom performers are within your organization and your top performers are in your organization. You have to do everything you can. Every business owner I impart on, I understand if you don't know who your top performers are, your top 15 to 20% of your organization, you need to figure that out very quickly. Because those are the people who actually drive the vast majority. It's almost like the 80-20 rule. That 20% of your top performers actually drive 80% of your revenue. And so you've got to figure out who they are. And then even more importantly is you have to put together talent retention. So identifying retention of your top performers. So one thing is identifying your top performers and then identifying what is your retention level of your top performers. And then on the converse side, if you're looking at a bell curve, your bottom performers. Who are your bottom performers and what are you doing to actively manage them? And either actively trying to coach them up. And if you can't coach them out, then coaching them. If you can't coach them up, then you look at how to coach them out. Because those folks it's almost like a boat, right? Everybody can visualize a boat. I used to own a boat for years. If you try to run the boat and you try to power up the boat and you get the boat to run when the anchor's still down, guess what? The boat's not going to go anywhere very quickly. And you may even cause some major damage to your boat.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you have a number of boat anchors in your organization, and every organization has an X percent of low performers, you need to figure out what to do with them. And sometimes they've just been poorly managed. And so then you need to figure out exactly how to manage them effectively and what to do to actually work with them, either coach them up or coach them out. The last thing I would say there is if you do use outside recruiters, identifying your talent management strategy. And if you are using outside recruiters, what are you getting the bang for your buck? Because I know some companies, one company I'm working with now, a construction company, they actually spent last year, and they're not a huge company, but they actually spent well over between $1 and $2 million in outside recruiters. And quite a few of their executives said, you know what? We're actually getting C players from our executive recruiters. And I'm like, why? And my next response is, why in the world are you using these external groups to actually recruit from you? Because either they're getting it wrong, you're using the wrong people, or you're not doing the quality of interviewing internally, or you don't even have the right job descriptions. You're not sure what you're going to use, what you need. So if you want to have a banana, don't ask them for a fruit. If you actually like eating bananas on a regular basis, don't say, just give me a fruit and I'll be happy with a fruit, because that's not going to work. Or my favorite example is, if you're trying to hire a purple squirrel, don't just ask them for an animal, because they may give you a hippo or a giraffe, and the hippo and giraffe is typically not going to work if you're actually looking for a purple squirrel.
Hippos are so lazy. I hate having hippos.
They kind of are, and every organization has a few hippos kicking around.
So you already mentioned this, so we won't spend any time here. Is the measure that employee and monitor the employee satisfaction so very important to overall productivity? Mark already went into some of the points there that the folks that are fully engaged want to do more, they want to drive more, they're always more productive. But it's so important, if you don't measure your employee satisfaction, then you don't really know where to go and do something about that. So one of the last things here is that the businesses sometimes are hard to transact, especially if, well, they're impossible to transact if they are dependent on the owner. Owner dependency is one of the biggest reasons why businesses fail to transition. What are some things that HR can do to help make a business less dependent on the owner?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, Tom, is invest in your leadership team. One of the biggest things is that, again, in lower middle market size companies, who many of us are very familiar with, everything runs through the owner, the /CEO, and they become the single, you hate to say, they're the single point of success, but on, of course, the flip side, they're the single point of failure. And if everything runs through, if all of the major, if you're saying, well, we have 20 major customers, and 19 of them are, if Joe's the CEO or the owner, well, 19 of them Joe brought on, and 19 of them Joe works with directly. And so if you're saying, well, your customer, if most of your revenue is tied to all these relationships Joe has as the owner, that's not necessarily a good thing to do. So you need to figure out, how do you start diffusing that and disseminating that within the organization. So having a good leadership team and investing in your leadership team is a really, really good thing to do. The next thing to do is, and I do this with some companies that are larger that I work with, getting ready to do it with one of my clients right now in November, is succession planning from a people perspective.
Yes.
Is really focusing on, when I look at succession planning, what it does is the HR concept of that, I would say, is understanding it. It's almost like, everybody knows everybody, maybe don't love football, but let's go with a football analogy. You got to figure out, every football team knows, if Dak Prescott unfortunately got injured for the season, if the coach doesn't know who's going to go in behind Dak Prescott when his ankle got totally torn up, they're like, well, let's see. Does one of you guys know how to throw a football? Okay. Oh, I think I want to be quarterback. I think that's fun. Why don't I put you back here? It's like, no, that's not the right answer. So making sure you identify your bench strength within your organization.
As someone who's not a Dallas Cowboys fan,
I know
it's sacrilege to many people who live here. Then I'm glad that they didn't really have a succession strategy. But that's how you can fail in those businesses. Kim, do we have any questions that we need to take here? By the way, I just glanced over at the questions. We're not going to have time for all of them today, but I will reach out. I love Mike Rose's example of what a hippo is. It's the highest paid person's opinion. So that's a hippo, and that is definitely a lazy thing in the organization.
Yeah.
Kim,
and let me jump in there too, Tom. I'm just going to jump in there too and say, if you want to talk to, this is kind of an unpaid plug here, but if you want to talk to an organization that has a great culture, Mike Rose's company at Mojo Media Labs, it's a phenomenal culture, and he's got so many great things going on, from traction to road to great game of business, that he and his wife Nicole have a really well-run company. So he's a great resource to talk to too.
Yes, most definitely. So Kim, what questions do we have here?
What do you use to measure employee satisfaction, tools or diagnostics?
Yeah, the tools and diagnostics, again, for depending on the size of the company, there are thousands of consulting firms that will help you measure employee engagement. I would just say, and if you want to get I've got a number of 20, 15 to 25 question type of questionnaires that you can do it very as simply as SurveyMonkey. So the key thing is having a mechanism. The key thing around employee engagement, having some core things. A couple of the core questions I would ask too is, and this one's always an interesting one because it's really hard to get a high score on. But do you feel like you're paid competitively? Another question off the top of my head is, do you trust your manager? And it's fascinating because quite a few people in a very toxic culture, they will score that one very low. I don't trust my manager, which is why most people leave organizations.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about there too, another one that I love too, have you thought about in the last 6 months, have you thought about leaving the organization in the last 6 months? And if a person scores high on that I agree with that statement, that I have thought about it, then you have issues. Then what you do is you use a mechanism to track it and measure it. And then you create task force tiger teams to then actually look at some of the areas you scored low in. And then you create teams to look at solving some of those gaps and those deficiencies within your organization. And those teams should not be leadership led. They should be employee led. And those teams should report back to the leaders once they have a game plan, because you want to empower your employees to kind of solve the solution, to look at the solution, being able to solve it versus being told by the leadership team, here's how we're going to solve it.
And those are all great things that you need to survey people on. The other thing that I really encourage is a simple NPS score. Would you recommend a friend to come to work at this business, or would you recommend somebody to come work here, and measure that NPS? That's a simple one question. It doesn't get you the information that you need, but you need to do that on a routine basis, because if you're monitoring the customer net promoter score, then that's important. If you don't know how to do that, reach out to us and we'll help you put that together. What else, Kim? Is there anything else that we need to cover?
Another good one I thought was, does it make a difference to a potential buyer if you have those processes documented like an employee handbook? Is it really critical to a buyer? Like, what is the impact?
Oh, holy cow. Yes. I have seen businesses, very small businesses, that have documented and follow their processes just to excruciating detail. But not that it encumbers the business. They just have everything down pat. They do everything so well. I've seen businesses that are so well documented and the processes are followed so well that the value of their business goes up as a result. So in a case where I've got a great example of that, we had a business that was trading at around in the industry about 6 times earnings, because the bigger company that was buying them, what they really wanted was the intellectual property of their processes to make the bigger company better. That company sold at 22 times earnings. Now, that is a wild example, right, of how something can happen, but having well-documented and followed processes can have a dramatic impact on the upside, but it will also have a dramatic impact on the low side, because a buyer comes in, if they don't have any documented processes, and let's say people don't like change, by the way, the new owner comes in, somebody decides, I'm out of here, and the processes that they're doing aren't documented. Well, what do you do, right? And so well-documented processes can have a significant impact on value of the business. And with that, I will make sure that we'll reach out and answer any additional questions that we have. You had the worksheet. I hope that you took some notes, but I want you to think through the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you can go do in your business right now. And so I want you to go do that. Mark, how can the folks get in touch with you again?
Sure. You can actually go directly onto our website. So hrcatalystconsulting.com. You can go out that way. You can connect. HR Catalyst has a LinkedIn. We have a HR Catalyst as a LinkedIn page, and you can connect with me directly on my LinkedIn. That has all of my contact information out there. And we also have quite a bit of content out there on YouTube on a variety of topics that would be happy to do that. And lastly, we do have a newsletter we push out about every 2 weeks. So if you'd actually like to go out there and sign up for the newsletter, I think we have about 2,500 people on that distribution. If you'd like to be able to start seeing that, you can go back out to our website, and there's a place you can sign up for our newsletter, and we'd be happy to have you out there. on that too.
Awesome. And you can also find Mark on the Mastery Partners website, or reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with him. Of course, here at Mastery Partners, our business is to help business owners transition their business on their terms. Every business will ultimately transition. Those that are prepared will have a much better chance of success. We use a 4-step process in what we do. It starts with step 1, where we assess the business on how ready it is for a transition to happen today, regardless of what that transition looks like. How ready is it? And we use that same 6-point scale that we talked about. Then we come in and understand what the desired outcome is. We've got a baseline, and now we understand what the desired outcome is, so we can build a roadmap to actually achieve the goals of the business owners. And once you have that, many of our customers go out and execute that on their own, or they can engage with us in step 3, and we'll develop an execution strategy to make sure that they can follow all those steps to realize the exit that they're looking for in their business. And then, of course, step 4 is the favorite part. You're ready to transition your business on your terms, and you have a much higher chance of being in that 17% of businesses that will be successful. If you'd like a copy of my book, it's available on Amazon. I love this. Kim puts this in. It's Tom's latest book. Well, that's not inaccurate. It's my latest book because it's my only book right now. My second book is still being written. So we'd love for you to get a copy of that, and it kind of walks through that. Also, check out our podcast, which is the Maximize Business Value podcast, wherever you might download podcasts. I had just an amazing conversation this week on the one episode 28 that was released this week with Michael Orr. It's a lot of fun. You should go listen to that. It's about demystifying marketing. Really enjoyed doing that with Michael. And of course, the podcast that Mark and I did a couple of months ago is also available out there. All those are evergreen. Want you to be sure to mark your calendar and join us again next month, where we'll be talking about things that you can do to improve the value of your business. Reach out to me on our website. Give me a call. My cell phone number is right there, or you can click the link on our website and just schedule a call with me if you'd like to do that. And so I really thank you for coming today. It's been a great pleasure to being with you. Thanks, Mark, for coming on and joining us and sharing your wisdom. I feel like we just kind of, shaved the tip off the iceberg here. We could talk for hours, all things HR, about how to improve the value of your business. So thanks for coming on today, Mark.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.